Somewhere in your city right now, there's a building that looks like nothing. No windows, no signage worth remembering. Just a gray box next to a highway, humming quietly to itself. Most people assume it's a warehouse with a jacket on, rent out some shelf space, keep the lights cold, collect a check every month. Simple. Boring. Safe. Here's the twist. That building isn't storing its own stuff. It's holding someone else's entire livelihood at -20 degrees. And if the wrong valve fails on the wrong night, that boring warehouse can lose more money in 1 week than the building itself is worth. If you like taking industries that look completely forgettable and finding the one hidden fault line that can bring the whole thing down, stick around, because this one has two. Owning a cold storage warehouse isn't really real estate. It's an insurance policy you didn't know you sold. Let's talk about what it actually costs to get in the door. If you're picturing a regular warehouse, steel frame, concrete floor, roll-up doors, forget it. Cold storage lives in a different universe of cost. A standard dry warehouse runs somewhere between $55 and $175 a square foot to build. Cold storage runs $130 to $350 a square foot, 2 to 3 times the price, before a single pallet has even rolled through the door. Why so much? Insulation thick enough to hold a 100-degree gradient between inside and outside, every hour of every day, forever. Vapor barriers that can't fail even slightly, or ice starts building up inside your own walls. And refrigeration systems, chillers, compressors, evaporators, that alone eat up 1/4 to 1/3 of your entire construction budget. Run the math on a mid-sized facility, and 100,000 square feet of cold storage will cost somewhere between $12.5 million and $20 million. A dry warehouse the same size costs a fraction of that. Here's the part that should scare off casual investors. This cost doesn't scale down kindly. A tiny 1,200 square foot cold room can still run $300,000 to $500,000 because the refrigeration plant and the insulation envelope cost nearly the same whether you're cooling a closet or a football field. Small players get punished twice. High entry cost and no economies of scale to soften it. So who actually plays this game? Not many. 2 companies, Lineage and Americold, control roughly 70% of all rentable refrigerated warehouse space in North America. 2 companies. 70%. This isn't an industry with thousands of scrappy competitors nibbling at the edges. It's a duopoly holding the cold chain of an entire continent's food supply, built on a capital moat most people never think about until they try to cross it. And once you're in, you learn fast that the real business isn't storage at all. It's who you're storing for. So you've spent your $20 million. The freezer's built, the compressors are humming, the insulation is sealed. Now, how does this thing actually make money? In 5 distinct layers, most of which nobody outside the industry ever thinks about. Layer 1 is the storage rent itself, and here's where cold storage breaks the normal rules of real estate. You don't lease by the square foot, you lease by the pallet position, a 3-dimensional unit that accounts for how high your racking goes, not just how much floor you cover. Refrigerated space typically rents for $8 to $15 per square foot per month. Frozen space, the deep cold, the -20 stuff, runs $12 to $20. $5 might not sound dramatic. Multiply it across 1 million square feet, and you're talking millions a year, just for a colder thermostat. Layer 2 is handling fees, and this is the one that catches new investors off guard because it's often just as important as the rent, sometimes more. Every pallet that comes in has to be received, checked, racked. Every pallet that goes out has to be picked, staged, loaded. Operators charge for all of it separately from storage. A facility can sit at 90% occupancy and still lose money if the throughput fees aren't structured right, because the labor to move product in and out is where the real margin actually lives. Layer 3 is value-added services. Blast freezing, for instance, taking product that arrives warm off a truck, say 40 degrees, and driving it down to zero within 24 hours. That's not a courtesy. It's a specialized energy-hungry process customers pay a premium for because most of them can't do it themselves. Add product conditioning, case picking, repackaging, and a storage business quietly turns into something closer to manufacturing, just wearing a warehouse's clothes. And it's not only food riding in these freezers. Pharmaceuticals move through the same cold chain: vaccines, insulin, biologics, and that cargo comes with its own premium. A pallet of frozen chicken that drifts a few degrees off spec gets written down as a loss. A pallet of vaccine that drifts a few degrees off spec gets destroyed outright and reported to a regulator. Customers pay extra for that level of certainty, which is exactly why pharma cold storage commands some of the highest margins in the entire industry, tucked quietly inside what looks, from the outside, like the same gray box holding somebody's frozen peas. Layer 4 is managed warehouse services, and this one's subtle. Sometimes the biggest operators don't even own the building, they just run it. A food company might own its own freezer, but have no idea how to actually operate one at scale, so it pays a company like Americold a management fee to run the facility for them. It's the warehouse version of hiring someone else to fly your private jet. You own the asset, they own the expertise, and the fee flows to whoever has the expertise. Layer 5 is the one that should genuinely surprise you. You'd assume revenue in this industry comes from thousands of small tenants, each renting a corner of the freezer. It doesn't. At Americold, the top 25 customers account for 59% of total revenue. 25 customers, more than half the money. This isn't a diversified landlord collecting small checks from many tenants. It's closer to a handful of food industry giants who happen to rent from the same landlord. If 2 or 3 of them walk, the whole revenue base wobbles. Line up all 5 layers and a strange picture forms. On paper, cold storage looks like the most boring, recession-proof real estate you could own. Perishable food always needs somewhere cold to sit, right? Underneath, though, it's a business where a huge chunk of income is tied to a handful of customers, where the real margin lives in labor-heavy fees nobody advertises, and where the premium frozen space that looks like your best asset is also your most expensive square footage to actually run. That last point matters more than it seems. Storage rent and handling fees are what you charge customers. Energy is what you pay to keep the promise. And refrigeration doesn't take days off. It doesn't care whether the freezer's half empty or completely full. The compressors run at nearly the same cost either way, which means your revenue can swing wildly with demand, while a huge slice of your costs simply refuses to move. That mismatch isn't a footnote. It's the seed of everything that goes wrong in this business, and it splits into 2 separate traps. Most people who invest in this industry only ever see one of them. Trap 1 is the frozen fixed cost floor. A refrigeration system isn't a light switch you flip on for a busy day and off for a quiet one. To hold a room at -20 degrees, the compressors run nearly continuously, fighting a 100-degree gradient against the outside air, whether that room is packed to the ceiling or sitting half empty. The physics doesn't care about your occupancy rate. The electric bill doesn't either. So picture what happens when demand softens even slightly. Say your customers, mostly food companies, decide to run leaner. Instead of stockpiling 6 months of inventory the way they did during the pandemic, when nobody trusted the supply chain, they shift towards something closer to just-in-time ordering. For them, that's a minor adjustment. For you, the landlord, it's the whole model buckling at once, because your revenue is tied directly to how full those pallet positions are, and your costs barely notice the difference. This isn't hypothetical. Lineage, the largest cold storage company on Earth, went public in 2024 in one of the biggest IPOs of the year. Priced at $78 a share, valuing the company north of $18 billion. Investors treated it like buying a slice of critical infrastructure. Food always needs to stay cold. What could go wrong? Within about a year, the stock had fallen to around $40, cut in half, not because of some outside shock, a recession, a war, a supply crisis, but because occupancy softened and customer inventory strategies shifted, and the fixed costs that don't care about occupancy just kept grinding away underneath. Revenue dipped a few percentage points. Earnings dropped further than that, and a stock the market had priced like an unshakable utility reacted like the fragile, occupancy-sensitive business it actually was. That's trap 1. Trap 2 is the one that should actually keep you up at night if you're the one holding the keys, because you're not really renting space, you're accepting custody. In a normal warehouse, if the roof leaks or the power goes out for a day, you've got an inconvenience, maybe some water damage, an unhappy tenant. Annoying, fixable, and critically, it's your problem, at a scale you can absorb. Cold storage doesn't work that way because you're not storing your own goods. You're storing someone else's entire inventory, food, sometimes pharmaceuticals, at values that can dwarf the building itself. And the thing keeping all of that value alive isn't the walls. It's the refrigeration system, which means the single point of failure in this business isn't structural. It's mechanical, and it runs on a chemical most people have never thought twice about. Anhydrous ammonia, the refrigerant behind the vast majority of large-scale cold storage systems, because it's cheap and thermodynamically hard to beat. Under normal operation, it's perfectly safe, sealed in a closed loop. But refrigeration systems have moving parts, valves, pressure vessels, and when one of those fails, the consequences don't stay contained to a maintenance report. Here's how the domino actually falls. In an incident investigators later reconstructed piece by piece, a cold storage facility lost electrical power. At almost the same moment, a liquid-level indicator on one of the ammonia vessels physically separated, and ammonia began leaking into the mechanical room. Under normal conditions, ventilation fans would have kicked on automatically and pulled the gas out within minutes. But the power outage had also disabled those fans. With nowhere to go, the gas spread from the mechanical room straight into the loading dock and storage rooms, because the mechanical room had never been physically separated from the rest of the building. The facility became unsafe for anyone to enter. Not for an hour, not for a day. For an entire week, nobody could get inside to even assess the damage, let alone save the product. When they finally did get back in, losses to frozen food alone came to over $180 million. $180 million from a single failed indicator and one badly timed power outage. Not a fire, not a hurricane. A $5 part failing at the exact moment the system that would have saved everything also happened to be offline. This is what separates cold storage from almost every other real estate asset class. In an office building, if the HVAC dies, people go home for the day. Here, if the refrigeration fails and can't be fixed fast enough, the value sitting inside the building simply stops existing. And because it belongs to your customers, not you, the loss doesn't land quietly on your own books as depreciation. It lands as liability claims from every tenant whose product was in that building, all at once. Two traps stacked on top of each other. One is slow, a fixed cost structure that punishes you every time demand softens, the kind of thing that took down Lineage's stock without a single dramatic headline event. The other is instant, a mechanical failure that can turn a routine Tuesday into a 9-figure loss before lunch. And you can do everything right on one front and still get blindsided by the other, because they don't share a cause. One comes from the market. The other comes from a valve. Let's put names and dates on both, because the abstract version is scary, but the specific version is what actually sticks with you. Start with Lineage, Incorporated, Novi, Michigan, July 2024. This wasn't a small player testing the public markets. It was the world's largest cold storage operator, and its IPO was the biggest of the year, raising over $4 billion. Analysts called it climate-conscious infrastructure. For about 9 months, it looked like they were right. Then came the numbers. By April 2025, quarterly revenue had slipped, occupancy had softened, and adjusted earnings were falling faster than revenue, the fixed cost floor we just walked through, showing up live on an earnings call. The stock didn't drift down gently. It cratered, hitting a low near $41 by midsummer, nearly a 50% collapse from the IPO price in under a year. For a company the market had priced like a utility. Then it got messier. A pension fund filed a class action lawsuit, alleging Lineage had concealed just how much its customers were shifting toward leaner inventory before the IPO. Meaning the trap wasn't a surprise to management at all. It was a known risk, dressed up as an infrastructure story. Now Trap 2, and this one goes back further, to a facility in Theodore, Alabama, operated at the time by Millard Refrigerated Services. In 2010, the plant experienced what safety investigators call hydraulic shock, high-pressure hot gas, used for defrosting colliding with cold liquid ammonia inside the piping. Hard enough to make equipment fail catastrophically and release ammonia with almost no warning. Federal investigators studied it closely enough to build an entire safety bulletin around what happened there. Here's the detail that tells you everything about how this industry actually works. By March of 2014, that same company had been acquired by Lineage, the very operator now facing a lawsuit over hiding fixed cost risk from its own IPO investors is the same company that, through acquisition, inherited decades of exactly this kind of mechanical fragility, spread across dozens of facilities. Consolidation didn't make the hazard disappear. It just concentrated it under fewer logos. And that connects straight back to the nine-figure incident from a moment ago, the power outage, the failed indicator, the fans that couldn't run because the power was already gone, the week-long lockout, the $180 million loss in frozen product. Different facility, different year, same underlying vulnerability. A system where the only thing standing between a normal Tuesday and a nine-figure catastrophe is a handful of mechanical parts almost nobody outside the plant ever thinks about. Put these side by side and you get the full picture. On one side, a slow-motion trap that took the world's biggest cold storage company from an $18 billion valuation to a stock price cut in half, playing out across earnings calls and lawsuits. On the other, a fast trap that can erase 9 figures of value in the time it takes ventilation fans to fail to turn on. Neither company was reckless, either. Lineage is, by most operational measures, considered the best-run company in the sector. Millard was a serious, established operator long before it got acquired. That's the part that should actually unsettle you. This isn't a story about bad management. It's a story about an asset class where being good at the business still leaves two separate, unrelated doors that disaster can walk through. So what does it actually look like to win at this game versus lose at it? The best case looks like scale, discipline, and diversification stacked on top of each other. You're not one facility, you're hundreds, spread across regions. So a power outage in one city doesn't take down your whole book. You've automated as much of the handling layer as you can, because that's where margins quietly bleed out. That's not a small detail either. Operators running pallet shuttle systems and automated storage and retrieval can push tens of thousands of pallet movements through a single facility each week without a forklift in sight. And the companies that have gone all in on this kind of automation report labor costs dropping by up to 30% and accuracy rates near 99%. In a business where headcount and human error are two of the biggest hidden costs on the books, that's the difference between a facility that scales and one that quietly bleeds cash every time volume spikes. You've built long-term contracts across food, pharma, and grocery, so no single customer's inventory shift can gut your occupancy overnight. And you're collecting a dividend yield north of 6%, while the market slowly re-rates you back toward what your assets are actually worth. That's the bull case for a company like Lineage, still fully intact underneath last year's wreckage. Unglamorous, but real. The worst case looks like exactly what we've spent this video walking through. One facility, one region, one or two anchor customers who decide to run leaner, and your revenue drops while your refrigeration bill doesn't move an inch. Or worse, one valve, one power outage, 1 week you can't get through your own front door, and the claims start arriving from customers whose product you were supposed to protect, not gamble with. Strip away the branding, and that's really the whole business. Every other landlord in the world rents you square footage and hopes you take care of what's inside it. Cold storage flips that completely. You take custody of what's inside. You promise, silently, every single day, that the temperature will hold, the power will stay on, and the valve won't fail. And you charge rent for that promise the same way you'd charge rent for 4 walls and a roof. Which means the real product being sold in this industry was never the space at all. It was the promise that nothing goes wrong. And nobody in this business gets to buy insurance against their own promise breaking.